In December 2024, the Australian Bureau of Statistics released data that most media outlets overlooked. Australia's median household wealth reached $491,000, the highest figure per capita among major OECD nations. At the same time, the United States Census Bureau confirmed that American median household net worth, adjusted for purchasing power, has stagnated since 2007. This isn't a temporary fluctuation. It's a structural divergence that has been building for 17 years. If you're Australian, this matters in three immediate ways. First, your superannuation and property values are now tied to a wealth dynamic that has decoupled from traditional Western allies. Second, this divergence affects how foreign capital views Australia, not just as a resource exporter, but as a stable wealth haven in an unstable American-led financial system. Third, it changes the calculus of political risk. When one partner in a security alliance becomes economically weaker, the terms of that alliance inevitably shift. In this video, we'll examine three things. First, how we arrived at this wealth gap. The decisions made in the wake of the global financial crisis that set these two economies on opposite trajectories. Second, what the numbers actually reveal when you strip away the headlines and look at household balance sheets, debt structures, and asset appreciation. And finally, what this divergence means for Australia's strategic position heading into 2026 and beyond. Let's begin. To understand today's situation, we need to briefly go back to 2008. When the global financial crisis hit, both Australia and the United States faced the same fundamental problem: collapsing demand, frozen credit markets, and a banking sector on the edge of insolvency. But they chose radically different responses. The United States pursued aggressive monetary expansion, quantitative easing, combined with fiscal austerity at the household level. American families were encouraged to deleverage, pay down debt, rebuild savings. This was framed as responsible recovery. Australia, by contrast, pursued direct fiscal stimulus. The Rudd government deposited cash directly into household bank accounts in December 2008. This kept consumer spending active. It prevented the deflationary spiral that trapped the United States for the next decade. Here's where the paths diverged permanently. The United States recovered asset prices, stocks, bonds, real estate in select cities, but wage growth remained suppressed. Most of the wealth created after 2009 flowed to the top 10% of earners. The bottom 60% saw negligible gains. Australia, meanwhile, experienced broad-based household wealth accumulation, driven primarily by housing, yes, but distributed more evenly across income brackets due to superannuation policy and compulsory savings mechanisms. By 2015, the gap was already visible. By 2020, it was undeniable. I want you to look closely at this comparison. In 2024, Australian median household net worth stood at $491,000. In the United States, the comparable figure was $192,000. That's a 2.5 times difference. Not between developing and developed economies. Between two of the wealthiest democracies on Earth. Now, some will argue this is purely a function of Australia's smaller population and inflated property market. That explanation is incomplete. Let's break it down by asset class. Australian households hold 72% of their wealth in residential property. True. But American households hold 65% of their wealth in financial assets, stocks, bonds, retirement accounts. And yet, despite a decade-long bull market in US equities, the median American household is not proportionally wealthier. Why? Because equity ownership in the United States is highly concentrated. The top 1% own 53% of all stocks. In Australia, superannuation forces broader participation in capital markets. 93% of working Australians have compulsory retirement savings invested in equities and bonds. This means when global markets rise, the benefits are distributed across a much wider base. What's unusual here is that Australia achieved this without sacrificing fiscal discipline. Debt to GDP ratios in Australia remain manageable. Government debt sits at 37% of GDP, compared to 123% in the United States. This is the part most headlines miss. Australia is wealthier per household and more fiscally stable than the United States. That's not a temporary anomaly. It's a structural advantage. Now let's think through what happens next. If the United States continues on its current trajectory, rising public debt, stagnant median incomes, concentrated wealth, three consequences emerge. First, political instability becomes a chronic feature, not a temporary phase. When median households feel economically insecure, they vote for disruption. We saw this in 2016. We are seeing it again now. This makes American foreign policy less predictable. Alliances become transactional. Long-term commitments come into question. For Australia, this creates a dilemma. Do you double down on the AUKUS agreement, knowing the American political system may repudiate it in 4 years? Or do you quietly diversify strategic partnerships? Second, capital flight accelerates towards stable wealth havens. Wealthy individuals and institutions seek jurisdictions with reliable rule of law, manageable debt, and broad-based prosperity. Australia ticks all three boxes. The United States is increasingly uncertain on the first and second. This explains why foreign direct investment into Australian real estate and infrastructure has surged since 2020. It's not just Chinese capital anymore. It's Canadian pension funds, Singaporean sovereign wealth, European family offices. They're placing long-term bets on Australian stability in a world where American stability is no longer guaranteed. Third, the terms of the security alliance shift quietly but decisively. When one partner carries disproportionate economic risk, the other gains leverage. If the United States needs Australia's geographic position for Indo-Pacific strategy more than Australia needs American defense guarantees, and that gap is widening, then Australia's negotiating position strengthens. We are already seeing early signals of this. Australia's recent engagement with ASEAN, its independent trade agreements with India, and its participation in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership all suggest a hedging strategy. This isn't abandonment of the US alliance. It's rational diversification in response to American economic fragility. The question becomes, how long can a security partnership survive when the economic fundamentals are moving in opposite directions? So when you step back, three truths emerge. First, the wealth gap between Australia and the United States is real, structural, and widening, driven not by temporary market conditions, but by fundamentally different policy choices made over the past 17 years. Second, this divergence gives Australia strategic optionality that it did not possess a decade ago. The ability to engage with multiple powers without total dependence on American economic or military protection. Third, the assumption that American primacy is permanent, that the global order will remain stable because Washington guarantees it, is no longer safe to make. Australia is navigating a transition, not from one hegemon to another, but from a unipolar world to a multipolar one where wealth, power, and influence are more evenly distributed. The country that adapts to that reality first gains the most. Here's the question I'll leave you with. Does Australia's growing economic independence strengthen its position in the world? Or does it create new vulnerabilities by weakening the incentive for allies to defend it? I'd like to hear your assessment in the comments. If this analysis concerns you, I strongly recommend watching my breakdown of AUKUS and the hidden costs of nuclear submarine agreements. We examine what Australia is actually committing to, and whether the strategic benefits justify the economic and political trade-offs. Thank you for watching.